Sair da escola já com uma formação profissional no currículo? Parece bom demais pra ser verdade, né? Pois é. No ensino técnico do Senac, isso é possível. É ensino médio junto com formação técnica, que acontece durante os 3 anos. Lá, eles usam metodologia para projetos, desenvolvendo competências como resolução de problemas, pensamento crítico e colaboração, além de valores éticos e sustentáveis. Quer saber? Senac. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino médio e saiba mais.
Não é tempo técnico, mas é intervalo aqui no podcast. Já imaginou se seu time tivesse um seguro para não perder nunca? Pois é, isso não existe. Mas com a Zurich Seguros, quem não perde nunca é você. Na Zurich Seguros, os planos se adequam às suas necessidades em qualquer momento da sua vida. Seja seguro de auto, residência, vida e muito mais. Diferente de alguns times, na Zurich Seguros você pode confiar. Para saber mais, acesse zurich.com.br ou consulte seu corretor.
The Athletic.
Hi everyone, Edd Straw here with some bonus F1 content for you from the Race Members Club that we think you'll enjoy hearing a preview of. Throughout 2024, I've been part of a new show we've been doing under the banner of our sister podcast Bring Back V10s, which looks back at F1's iconic V10 era. The show is called 1997 Revisited, and we've been doing a mini episode on every race from that classic season, which was voted the best of the era by the Bring Back V10s audience. We're reaching the memorable climax of that season now, with just a couple of highly charged rounds remaining, so we thought we'd give you a taster of what you've been missing if you're not yet part of our members club. And if you're interested in signing up, stick around until the end of the episode to hear about a special offer where you can get money off your first month with us on Patreon. But first, we're going to have a listen to clips that look back at various moments from 1997, starting with the second round of the season in Brazil, where it looked like championship favourite Jacques Villeneuve had put himself in all kinds of trouble at the start.
Like Australia, it was eventful from the off. So this time we had Villeneuve and Schumacher sharing the front row. Villeneuve again not great off the line. I think his actual launch was good, but then maybe got into a bit of wheel spin or who knows. But Schumacher pulls alongside him.
And they call it the second phase now, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, we didn't have any of that nonsense back in the 90s.
No.
Things were simpler.
It's just the start.
Yeah. So Schumacher and Villeneuve are side by side. Villeneuve kind of tries to tough it out when it's probably a lost cause. Schumacher obviously isn't going to stand for that. But I wouldn't say here that Schumacher kind of shoves him off the track. I mean, Villeneuve then just skates off the track. So at this point, we're going 2 starts in a row where Villeneuve's ended up off the track on the outside of the first corner. This time, he's not out of the race. He bounces across a bit of grass and gravel. And I think he rejoined about 8th. But he massively gets away with it because the race gets red flagged because Rubens Barrichello has stalled on the grid. So there's quite a lot. We'll do it in separate chunks here. Let's start, Matt, with Villeneuve going off. Should he have just given up the corner to Schumacher and slotted into second?
No, never. That's not a Jacques Villeneuve way of doing it. Williams wouldn't be signing someone to do that. They signed Villeneuve to do Larry and practical things that nearly cost them championships, but are glorious along the way. I think this actually turned into a lost chance for Jacques Villeneuve ultra-heroic glory. I think this could have been on par with Estoril 96 for a Villeneuve comeback amazing victory.
Oh, that would have been, yeah.
He had
great.
that setup with great straight line speed. He was so feisty at that point. Best car. I can see him coming back from 8th-ish, wherever he ended up, to win on the road. I think Berger might have been a tough obstacle, but everyone else I could see him just clearing through sheer Villeneuve-ness.
Yeah, that's never crossed my mind before. I've always been caught up in the... I still get anxiety now watching that first start and seeing him go off because I can remember how I felt watching it live, thinking, I can't believe he's done it again. I'd never computed, actually, best car, track where you can overtake. We've missed out on a classic victory.
Or he just steams into someone on about lap 4. But it's one or the other, really, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe I take comfort from that we didn't have to see that. What do you think, Ed?
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think Villeneuve was a bit stupid there because they knew Schumacher wasn't quick in a straight line. They'd had to crank on the wing to make the car work and make it work on its tyres. It was an easy pass if he just slotted into second. So it was pretty stupid. There's a great quote after the race from Patrick Head, because Frentzen went off as well in that first start.
He did, yeah.
Where it's a Patrick Head classic where he says, "I'll probably say to both our drivers that this isn't the way to win world championships." That was his verdict to the start. And I think he had a point when it came to that. The good thing is...
He was wrong, though, wasn't he, in the end?
well, this did work, but only because of the red flag. But yeah, I think the one good thing is that Villeneuve did learn from that first start, at least as we saw, because I think what happened at the restart would have happened at the original start if he just accepted P2 in the first corner. Our next clip is from the Argentinian Grand Prix, when Jordan teammates Ralf Schumacher and Giancarlo Fisichella famously came together in a race the team could have won.
We've had a couple of mentions already of the Jordans. Obviously, they were right in the mix here. This was Jordan's 100th race in Formula One, and they were running second and third after an Eddie Irvine pit stop when Ralf Schumacher goes up the inside of Fisichella at the hairpin that's kind of at the end of, I guess you could call it the back straight. It's kind of a middle straight that's got a really fast kink in it, quite a mega corner actually, then into a hairpin. Ralf goes up the inside and they collide. Fisichella's out. Eddie Jordan and I think most of the Jordan team are absolutely furious. Ralf, I guess fortunately for him, does go on to finish third behind Villeneuve and Irvine. Ben, how do you assess the collision? There are a couple of angles of it. I think we had the sort of terrestrial TV angle, and then the season review had a different angle of it. So there's kind of a slightly in front and slightly behind angle. Did it give you enough to make a definitive decision on assessing this collision?
I'm not totally sure. I feel like it's definitely a needless collision.
Between teammates, certainly.
I feel like really Jordan should have had just a better handle on the whole situation, knowing it's got like two young up-and-coming drivers, maybe a bit hot-headed, desperate to prove themselves. It looks like at that stage Schumacher is quicker, and Fisichella just kind of clumsily closes the door, and then bang, that's it, it's too late. And it's one thing to say, the Jordan team are furious, obviously they would be, but at the same time, it's your team and your drivers, like tell them what to do in that situation, have some communication, and if you're seeing that Ralf is quicker, protect the team result by having Fisichella let him through, or at least have the argument with him, rather than just letting them try and badly settle the issue between themselves on the track.
I think it's one of those ones that also comes down to it being situational, because Fizzy has made a little mistake. This is what Gary Anderson always says, that Fisichella made a bit of a mistake in the previous corner and that let Ralf attack. And certainly, although if you look at the pure basis of the accident, it was largely Ralf, Fizzy also, given it was his teammate, maybe should have just given up and given him a little bit of space. But what really matters about this is that 5-word summary I did about a great surprise when lost, it didn't just apply to the potential for Panis, because Jordan could have won this race. They were both one stopping. They were in a really good position, and obviously one car was out, the other one was delayed, and Ralf went on to finish third. So that was hugely significant for them. It's funny actually. There were all sorts, because the Jordan mechanics didn't celebrate at the end of the race, come over to the pit wall and all jump around. And I saw multiple theories about it. Some said that they were really annoyed with Ralf. Some said that there was a big dispute going on about bonus payments or something in the garage, so the crew didn't really want to have that enthusiasm. And some said it was a superstition thing because Rubens had lost a podium right at the end of Hungary a few years earlier on the last lap, and they'd gone out and then it had happened, so it's a superstition. So I thought, let's ask Gary Anderson what he thinks. And he says, well, I can't remember, but it was probably we're just all annoyed with Ralf. But that's the thing. It was a great 2-car result lost for them. It could have been a 1-2. Which would have been, it could have been an absolutely fantastic finish had the Jordans and Panis been around, which is why it's such an annoying and unnecessary collision for them to have. But yeah, I tend to agree with Gary's thing that they could both have avoided that had maybe Fizzy, given it was his teammate, needed to be a little bit more sensible, but Ralph also was a little bit too aggressive and reckless.
They didn't race like they were in the same team, basically.
Ever.
No, they didn't. But that's what happens when you have two rookies in your car, ultimately, isn't it? As a risk.
Also, Ed, I think your win theory is asking an awful lot of physical sustaining race pace.
particularly given they didn't have Alan Permain radioing to him every now and saying, Fizzy,
Wake up!
You're going 2 seconds slower. This is literally not possible.
Yeah, classic Fizzy Keller. Bear in mind, this is 1997. This is all when we thought Fizzy Keller was a future megastar still.
Yeah, indeed.
But yeah, they were. Obviously, Fizzy had done a few races in 96, but two effective rookies and probably more interested in furthering their own careers and prospects than working as the team. And as Ben said, if Eddie didn't have a handle on it from the pit wall, then a bit of inexperience or naivety from the team as well. So I'm kind of frustrated now because it's never really crossed my mind before, the fact that if we'd had Panis and the Jordans all in that fight as well, with what we ended up with Villeneuve and Irvine at the end.
Sounds like a band name, Panis and the Jordans.
Could have been a mega second half to this race that we lost.
They could have all had a collision and Johnny Herbert won for Sauber.
No, he would have found a way to throw it away, as well as he was
Justice for
driving.
Australia.
Yes.
As you can imagine, in a look back at 1997, reigning world champion Damon Hill's forgettable title defence with arrows comes up a fair bit. So let's hear a chat about his collision with Shinji Nakano in the San Marino Grand Prix.
The place where we are starting this episode is with Ben's Damon Hill exclamation. And we have to move quite a long way down to the back of the field to find what Damon was up to. I've got it in my notes as Damon Hill wiping out Shinji Nakano, and then being grouchy and non-apologetic afterwards. Ben, even from your position as a Damon Hill sympathiser, are you going to argue with my notes there?
Well, not really. I mean, he's understandably grouchy because the car's so terrible, and he's the defending world champion. He's racing Shinji Nakano for like 18th place or whatever it was.
Cheesed off was the phrase he used, wasn't it? I was pretty cheesed off.
That's a nice British phrase, isn't it? From the British world champion, cheesed off. Yeah, mighty, jolly cheesed off. But I mean, there's maybe some query about damp on the inside line, and that might have exacerbated. Yes, generous. Yeah, it's generous. So really, to me, it just looked like he'd gone full 95 Michael Schumacher duel and just gone, I'm sending it down the inside completely unrealistically. Oh, I've locked up, I'm over the curb, bang, it's over.
I don't think I think it was almost even worse than that. It was almost a resignation, wasn't it? He seemed to view Nakano as if he was a back marker being lapped, and like, oh, he's just not getting out of my way. He was driving around slowly, and then was just turning in on me. It's like, yeah, because he was going around the track. It was without.
Yeah, you were racing him, Damon. Sorry.
Exactly. It was without doubt the worst. Pretty much the worst moment of Hill's arrow stint, and I think I said this.
It's beneath him, though, isn't it? The whole thing was beneath him.
I think I said when we talked about this on our episode on this race, our full Bring Back V10s episode, that it was just completely disrespectful because it was just, I'm having a bad day. The thing that was really funny though is Damon Hill being Damon Hill. He's a fairly honest sort of character, and even straight out of the car in his interview after it, he couldn't really hide that. If you look at the season review,
it's a great interview
when he talks about being, because he just sort of explains it. He does a half-baked thing. He says, "Oh, and I was a bit cheesed off because I started from the pit lane." It just absolutely sounds like someone just thinking, "What's the point? I'll just have a go." And I feel a bit sorry for Shinji Nakano on that one, actually.
Yeah, completely. If you don't want to crash into Shinji Nakano, don't sign for arrows. It's a fairly simple equation.
We'll skip forward a few races now to the Canadian Grand Prix. Villeneuve famously crashed out of his home race very early on in 1997, but we're going to look at another potential winner of this race, McLaren's David Coulthard, who looked to have it in the bag until he made a precautionary pit stop.
Not for the last time in Canada. This was a weird race, actually, where some drivers were destroying their tyres almost immediately at the beginning of runs. At the beginning of the race, Heinz-Harald Frentzen had pitted after just 10 laps for new tyres. Didn't even take fuel on, and then late in the race David Coulthard came in to do the same. Coulthard had originally been one-stopping, which had got him into the lead. And when Michael Schumacher made, so late in the race, a third stop, which was just 7 laps after Michael's second stop because he'd blistered a tyre immediately, McLaren decided to bring Coulthard in for a precautionary tyre change as well, as he'd blistered his left rear. So he was coming back in, like Frentzen did early on, just for tyres. Fuel wasn't necessary. But then disaster struck, as Coulthard initially couldn't get a gear, and then when he did get a gear, the car stalled. They refired it, and it stalled again. He's in the pits for over 2 minutes, which drops him from the lead. He was on course to win this race. He drops out of the points. Obviously, we have the benefit of hindsight here. Matt, trying to look away from that, did this feel like an unnecessary risk when McLaren called him in, or did it actually feel like common sense because he's got a blistered tyre, he's got a lead, the other guys just had to do another pit stop, come in and sort your tyres out?
I have spent a lot of Bring Back V10s being negative about McLaren and Ron Dennis and that sort of thing, but actually I totally get this one, and I got it at the time as well. Like I said, this was a crazy race. People were doing things with tyres that didn't make sense. The understanding of what the tyre wall was doing at this track was just all too new for them to get their heads around at this point. And if I was McLaren, I'd absolutely go, well, we now have a massive lead. We have a lot of laps left. Ooh, we're in tyre trouble. Cover this off. I thought Coulthard were driving such a good race as well. I think that was one of his best unrewarded drives in an often quite luckless F1 career. I don't know about luckless, actually. That's too generous, possibly. He threw away a lot of opportunities.
Oh, go on. You're being nice. Stick with it.
Okay, I'll stick with it. I'm being nice about McLaren, Ron Dennis and Coulthard. Yeah, this was absolutely understandable, sensible thing to do. Just really, really, really bad luck for him.
It's really tempting to think of it as a classic, like Ron Dennis over-engineer the race and react to what Schumacher's doing, protect what you have. And the way he talks about it afterwards, where he's got this painful tone in his voice of, well, we made the right call, but then, everything just went wrong for us and you couldn't have predicted it. You look at the tyre when it comes off and it does look, the left rear, I think, looks particularly messy. So it's likely he would have had to stop inevitably anyway to replace that. So it was the right thing. But because, and you can't predict this, the red flag comes not too much later, you kind of feel like, if they just waited a little bit longer and not reacted to what Schumacher was doing,
yeah, you can't legislate,
he would have been fine. And when I watched the race at the time, I remember just thinking, you've just thrown it away. That's a nailed on win, and you've thrown it away. Why have you come into the pits? But with the benefit of hindsight and a bit more knowledge about F1, you think, well, that tyre was going to go. It wasn't going to last. So if the clutch is as messed up as it was anyway, then his fate is almost undeniable, I think, in that instance.
It's worth noting that there had been some reports he'd made back to the pits earlier in the race about, I think it was downshift problems that they couldn't find any evidence of. So this problem was kind of there and lingering, and actually DC had detected it. I presume it was related to that. That's the assumption anyway. So there was a bit of a hint of it, but I think it may well have been that the die was cast long before the actual pit stop even. More McLaren chat for you next as we move on to the British Grand Prix, where the team took a puzzling approach to managing its 2 drivers early in the race.
As Ben's briefly mentioned there, part of the reason Schumacher had such a big margin over the rest of the field was that David Coulthard had been holding up a train of cars led by teammate Mika Häkkinen. Coulthard made a great start from the 3rd row to slot in behind Villeneuve and Schumacher, but he had a brake problem that was slowing him down. He'd flat spotted a tyre, presumably because of that problem. But it wasn't until lap 28, so nearly half distance, when Häkkinen gets through. And even that is only because DC gets it wrong on the brakes at club, goes off, and Häkkinen can finally overtake him. Ed, given that Coulthard had a problem, why on earth didn't McLaren get him to move aside for Häkkinen to see if Häkkinen could get after the front 2?
Yeah, this was really stupid because the McLaren was quick as well. Häkkinen had only been a couple of tenths off in qualifying, so it was fast, and it was crazy to do that, especially as they were on a one-stopper as well, both of them. So it made sense to not give away time early in the race, and it's one of those things that had the race panned out a certain way, that could have been super costly. That could have cost them a win, depending on what hypothetically may or may not have happened in the last few laps that didn't happen, as it were. So yeah, just really, really stupid. And that it wasn't like it was one of those ones where that lap time loss wasn't clear, because it was happening immediately, and Schumacher and Villeneuve just disappeared while that train was just just loitering around, gradually disappearing into smaller and smaller dots in their mirror. So yeah, just really stupid from McLaren, and obviously down the line they'd become a little bit less reluctant to issue such team orders, shall we say.
I was totally baffled by the fact that they didn't do this, except that it's his home race. So you wonder if there's some kind of like, we can't get him to move out the way.
It's not very on brand for this era of McLaren to not favour Hakkinen at the first opportunity, certainly in DC's eyes.
But maybe they had that first corner agreement thing, that whoever's ahead gets priority, and DC obviously did get ahead, even though he was then just ruining the race. And also, I mean, now it would be cutthroat. It's like the strategic advantage of using the slower car to bottle up the rest and give Hakkinen basically a free run to third and maybe a crack at the leaders. It's a no-brainer. But at this point in Formula One history, it just looks like they're being really flat-footed, and they're leaving themselves massively exposed to the one-stopping Benettons in a race where certainly Hakkinen would have had the pace to be well ahead of them, I think.
And the thing for me is that it's not that classic, one teammate's behind the other and what we see now of I've got more pace, like the whole like, just let me through and see if I can go any quicker. Coulthard had a problem. He's holding everybody up. The first car he's holding up is his teammate who's got great pace. I don't know. It's a really obvious one. It's not a marginal call.
Let's move on to Spa next, where inevitably the weather was a talking point. But did the conditions at the beginning of the 1997 race really warrant a safety car start?
Let's move on then. A pre-race downpour, of course, it's Spa, flooded the track. There's some great footage of cars splashing their way to the grid. But one who didn't make it that far was Ralf Schumacher, who crashed on his way to the grid, and he had to run back to the pits to get in the spare car. Again, there's footage of this, him sort of running from Blanchimont to the pit entry. And it's one of those things that F1 cars make that run obviously look relatively short, but when you see somebody doing it on foot, you realise it's quite a long way. By the time the race actually started, the sun was out, of course. The track was still very wet, though, so the race started behind a safety car, and after 3 laps at reduced speed, the cars were let loose. Ben, what did you think of starting behind the safety car? Was it the right decision?
No, not a fan of this at all. I think, one, it was a hot weekend, so the track was going to dry quickly. The rain was like an aberration, really. In terms of the story of that particular Spa weekend, although it's not normally an aberration for Spa. And I feel like if the track is too wet to start, then you should just wait, try and find ways to clear it a bit, and then start the race when it's dry enough, especially if you know it's going to be hot and it's going to dry out. I feel like also there were cars on intermediates, not full wets at the start of this race, so clearly it wasn't so bad. That
always annoys me.
Yeah, so if it's dry enough that you can use inters competitively, you don't need to be starting the race behind the safety car.
I think this was the start of a habit that Formula One's only just weaned itself off, because I think this was the first time this happened, when you had a proper safety car start. And yeah, that going to... I could just about accept even one lap to have a look, because Hakkinen did have an off, didn't he? And then repassed a couple of cars and got himself in trouble for doing that. But so the conditions were tricky, but yeah, it's just that template for leaving safety cars out too long. I know it was only 3 laps, but it meant that it got closer to intermediate conditions, and that influenced the whole shape of the race. So yeah, the start of something a little bit disappointing, let's put it that way, that's held sway for some decades.
I also wonder if there was backlash to this at the time. Is that why they didn't start the 98 race behind the safety car? They've got them the wrong way round, haven't they? You got the sun's out, the track's dry, and people are in intermediates. Start the 97 race normally, maybe have a safety car start in 98. How different F1 social media content and YouTube would be if people couldn't just constantly show that crash and Murray Walker losing his mind. I will take another dig here at the season review, the 97 season review video, which until watching it back, I loved, but there's lots of faults with it. There's a bit at the start when they pull away and the guy says, already signs that the track is drying or something like that. And they show the dry patch that was underneath the safety car before it pulled off the grid. That's not a drying track. That's when you pull out of a parking bay and you've left a dry patch underneath.
For our final clip in this teaser, let's dig into an incident that led to one of the memorable images of the 1997 season, when Jean Alesi's Benetton vaulted into the air after colliding with Eddie Irvine's Ferrari at the Austrian Grand Prix.
Let's move on then. Around the time of the leaders making their only pit stops, we had one of the iconic images of the 97 season when Jean Alesi's Benetton bounced into the air over the top of Eddie Irvine's Ferrari as they squabbled over 12th place. Alesi was on the inside at the tight corner at the top of the hill. These days we call it turn 3. Back then it was called turn 2. Irvine's on the outside, I think attacking Alesi, who may have just come out of the pits. They bang wheels exiting the corner, and that's when Alesi's car takes off. He's out on the spot, kind of trundling into the gravel. Irvine limped home to the pits to retire as well. Ed, we were discussing before recording that footage of this in its entirety isn't great. Have you seen enough to be able to determine for us who's at fault?
Yeah, I think it is pretty much Alesi. There's always a little bit of a risk when you're going around the outside, but Irvine is well around the outside. And Alesi just does the thing of taking the corner as if Irvine can just vanish, and that trajectory just takes him into it. And if you do watch it, like the season review, for example, Alesi's just getting to the exit. You see he takes a fair bit of curb as well. You can see the car reacting to that. So he's not left any margin at the exit for recognising he's going to need to take the corner a little more tightly than he normally would do. So yeah, I think it was just Alesi being a bit foolish and John Alesi really, but because Irvine is right there. It's sort of side-to-side contact. It's not like he just catches the front of the Ferrari or anything. So, yeah, I definitely blame Alesi for this one. But there's an element of if you're around the outside, there's always the risk. I seem to remember Martin Brundle being very critical of Alesi after this particular one. And, yeah, I think he was probably right on that one. But, yeah, Alesi's funny because he just sort of says, oh, he didn't give me any space. And it's like, well, what you mean is he didn't vanish off the face of the earth.
Yeah, his defence seemed to be, how dare you try to overtake me around the outside? I'm not sure that really stacks up.
Yeah, it's just quite funny. It's very Alesi, isn't it? Just very, very Alesi. He's not factored in the weight of the fuel. He's not factored in there's a car there, and he's just trying to sort of wing it. And then, as happens when you wing it, sometimes you take off.
Such a weird incident because the footage is bad. If you watch the race coverage from the time, you only see it on replay, and it looks like it's Alesi passing Irvine. So if you see it as that, you think, well, it's just a really clumsy move. He's gone down the inside, clobbered the curb, should have been able to get it done better. But when he's cast in the defensive role, I feel a little bit more sympathy just for this idea of the guy going around the outside needs to do a bit more to get the move done. When they come out, Irvine's really not got it done. They should both be able to go down the next straight together in an ideal world.
But it's Alesi and Eddie Irvine.
But it's Alesi and Eddie Irvine, exactly.
The thing is, I think even if Irvine had been almost completely clear, Alesi would still have clouted him. So I think Alesi's not playing the percentages there at all, I would say.
As Glenn alluded, saying it's Alesi and Irvine, my thought at the time, because the footage, like you say, you don't see how the incident really begins, I just looked at that and thought, they're both idiots. I'm sure it was both their fault.
Well, there is an element of risk on the outside. That's always the way you do run the
especially on the outside of John Alesi.
Exactly. You never know what's going to happen. Those are a few taster clips that give you an idea of what we've been getting up to in our 1997 Revisited series. You can listen to the whole season in full, and of course without ads, by joining the Race Members Club on Patreon. And if you sign up now, you can take advantage of our special Black Friday offer, where you can get 30% off your first month in either our Racers tier or an F1 only equivalent for those of you who only want F1 content. And if you'd like to get an even bigger discount, you can get 50% off our top Champions tier by entering the code CHAMP. That's CHAMP. To do that, select the Champions tier, then enter the code CHAMP when prompted. These offers are running for a limited time only, so act fast to make sure you don't miss out. And while I've greatly enjoyed looking back on 1997 as part of this series, the 2024 season is still in full swing. I am about to head to Las Vegas for the first part of the triple header. There's going to be loads more bonus content on Patreon in the coming weeks for you to enjoy while taking advantage of this great discount. And in the meantime, we hope you enjoy listening to our 1997 Revisited series as much as we enjoyed recording it.
The Athletic.